The rain was a low hum against the glass of the dimly lit jazz club, but inside, the only sound I could hear was the frantic, uneven thrum of my own pulse. She was sitting far too close. Elena had always operated in a world of blurred boundaries, but tonight the air between us felt heavy, like it was charged with static electricity. Every time she laughed, her shoulder brushed mine, a lingering, intentional contact that sent a jolt straight to my chest. I tried to focus on my drink, but the scent of her perfume, a heady mix of vanilla and dark musk, was everywhere, clouding my judgment. She leaned in, her lips hovering just inches from my ear, her breath warm against my skin. "You're awfully quiet tonight, Leo," she whispered, her voice a low velvet feline purr that made my grip tighten around my glass. "Are you afraid of what might happen if you actually speak your mind?" I turned my head, and suddenly the teasing stopped. We were eye to eye, our faces so close that the rest of the room faded into a blurred smear of neon amber and shadow. Her eyes were dark, searching, and filled with a playful defiance that dared me to cross the line I'd spent months drawing. I felt the heat rising in my neck as she reached out, her fingers slowly tracing the line of my jaw. It wasn't just a touch, it was a claim. Her skin was cool, but it felt like a brand. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. My heart was racing so hard I was sure she could feel it vibrating through the space between us. The silence stretched, thick and suffocatingly sweet, until the tension was a physical weight. Just as I leaned in, finally ready to break the distance and find out if this spark was real, she pulled back with a cryptic, devastating smile. She stood up, grabbed her coat, and slipped through the crowded exit without a word. I sat there for a heartbeat, breathless and reeling, before I noticed she'd left her phone sitting face up on the velvet cushion. It lit up with a single notification that made my blood turn to ice. The message on the screen was a ghost from a life I didn't recognize. "Everything is ready. Don't keep me waiting." No name, just a string of numbers and a cold, clinical urgency that clashed violently with the warm, intoxicating woman who had just been touching my face. Our relationship had always been a masterpiece of beautiful distractions. For 2 years, Elena and I were the couple everyone envied, the kind that shared private jokes in crowded rooms and seemed to move in perfect sync. But beneath the surface, the cracks had been widening for months. It started with the work trips that left her exhausted and distant, and the way she began shielding her phone like a precious secret. There were nights when I'd wake up at 3 a.m. to find her standing by the window, staring out at the city lights with an expression of profound, aching longing that I couldn't reach. I remembered a rainy Tuesday 3 weeks ago. We were cooking dinner together, the kitchen filled with the smell of garlic and herbs. I had stepped behind her, wrapping my arms around her waist and burying my face in the crook of her neck. For a moment, she melted against me, her hands covering mine, and the world felt solid again. "I wish we could stay right here, just like this," I had murmured. She had stiffened just slightly. "We can't stop time, Leo," she'd replied, her voice tinged with a sadness that felt like a warning. Then she turned in my arms, her eyes searching mine with a sudden desperate intensity. She kissed me then, a hard, hungry kiss that tasted of salt and unspoken goodbyes. It was a moment of peak attraction, a fire that burned so bright it blinded me to the fact that she was saying something she couldn't put into words. Now, standing in the club with her phone in my hand, those memories felt like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit. I felt a surge of protectiveness war with a dark, creeping suspicion. Was she in trouble, or was I being played? I grabbed my jacket and stepped out into the rain, my eyes scanning the sidewalk. I saw her, a flash of her red coat disappearing around the corner of an alleyway 3 blocks down. She wasn't heading to our apartment. She was walking with a purposeful, hurried stride, her head down, avoiding the street lamps. I followed, keeping my distance, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every time she paused, I ducked into a doorway, my breath hitching in my throat. The romantic tension of the evening had curdled into something sharper and more dangerous. I wanted to run to her, to pull her into my arms and demand the truth, but a terrifying instinct told me that the truth was something I wasn't prepared to hear. The shadows of the city felt like they were closing in as I trailed her toward the old industrial district, a place of rusted iron and secrets. My mind was a chaotic storm of what-ifs and whys. Just an hour ago, I was drowning in the heat of her gaze. Now I was a ghost in her wake, fueled by a toxic cocktail of jealousy and a desperate, aching longing to be proven wrong. I wanted to believe she was protecting me, but the way she moved, furtive, urgent, almost primal, suggested a life I was never invited to share. She slipped through a heavy steel door of a converted warehouse. I waited a beat, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure dread, then followed. The interior was vast, draped in velvet curtains and lit by the low, flickering glow of floor-level candles. It looked like a temple for something forbidden. From the balcony, I looked down and felt the air leave my lungs. Elena was standing in the center of the room, and she wasn't alone. A man stood before her, his presence commanding and dark. He didn't touch her, not for at first, but the space between them was thick with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. He reached out, his hand hovering just an inch from her waist, exactly where mine had been earlier, and I saw Elena close her eyes, her head tilting back in a gesture of surrender that I thought belonged only to me. "You're late," he murmured, his voice echoing in the hollow space. I had to make sure he didn't follow, she whispered, her voice trembling with a cocktail of fear and something that looked terrifyingly like attraction. I gripped the railing so hard the metal bit into my palms. The jealousy was a physical burn, a searing heat that made me want to scream her name and tear the room apart. But more than the anger, it was the betrayal of the intimacy. Seeing her respond to his proximity, seeing the way her body leaned toward him like a moth to a flame, shattered the illusion of us. They began to speak in hushed, urgent tones about a final move and a price to be paid. Every word felt like a nail in the coffin of my heart. Just as he reached out to finally close the distance between them, his eyes flicked upward, straight toward the shadows where I stood. The man's eyes lingered on the balcony for a second too long, and I froze, my breath hitching in a throat tightened by sheer terror. But then he turned back to her, his gaze dropping to her lips. The air in the warehouse felt like it had been sucked out, replaced by a heavy, suffocating heat. I couldn't look away. It was a train wreck of my own heart, a peak of romantic agony that felt both beautiful and grotesque. I moved silently down the back stairs, driven by a masochistic need to be closer, to hear the breath between their words. I found myself behind a heavy velvet curtain, just feet from where they stood. Up close, the energy was even more intense, a raw, magnetic pull that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "You know we can't keep doing this, Elena," the man said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, intimate register. He stepped into her personal space, forcing her back against a stone pillar. Elena didn't flinch. She looked up at him, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths that mirrored my own. "He's the only thing that feels real," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But this is what I owe." He reached out, his thumb slowly brushing her lower lip, a gesture so bold, so charged with history that I felt a sob rise in my throat. The closeness was undeniable. They were two souls bound by a secret I was only just beginning to grasp. The tension between them wasn't just physical. It was the heavy, tragic weight of two people standing on the edge of a cliff. She reached up, her fingers trembling as they rested on his chest, right over his heart. For a moment, it looked like she was going to pull him in, to surrender to the forbidden gravity between them. The silence was a live wire, humming with the electricity of a breaking point. Just as their lips were a hair's breadth apart, my phone, the one I had forgotten to silence, erupted in my pocket. The sound shattered the intimacy like a gunshot. Both of them whipped their heads toward my hiding spot. Elena's eyes widened, turning a ghostly shade of panic as she whispered a single word, "Leo?" Before I could turn to run, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder from behind, and a cold voice whispered into my ear, "You really shouldn't have come here." The hand on my shoulder spun me around, and I found myself staring into the cold, clinical eyes of a man in a dark suit. But he wasn't looking at me with malice, he was looking at me with pity. Behind him, Elena and the man from the pillar rushed toward us. The warehouse, once a temple of forbidden whispers, suddenly felt like a courtroom. "Leo, wait!" Elena cried, her voice echoing off the rafters. She reached for me, her fingers grazing my arm with that same electric touch from the club, but I flinched away. The heat of her presence, which had once been my sanctuary, now felt like a burn.